Water. It's fundamental to our lives and environment. You need it every day. This is why Operation Unite has developed the Know Your Water program for water well users. Becoming a member of the Know Your Water program makes your life's water needs more manageable. It provides the information you need and teaches you how to use it. Call Operation Unite today, area code 530-263-1007, or email Steve Baker at operationunite.co. Operation Unite can help, and the Know Your Water program is the answer. Area code 530-263-1007. Operation Unite brings people together to solve water problems.
We will always have water working together. I'm Steve Baker. This is a tough year right now. Usually when there's a drought, we're thinking about wells going dry. But not only that, we need to think about our food also. I'm here with Jim Gates today, who's a rancher in Nevada County, California. And Jim's going to share with us exactly what it takes during a drought to bring up some heifers, as I guess you call them, to the point of harvesting and then putting that meat on our tables. Jim, how are you?
I'm doing good today.
All right. So we're here in this beautiful part of Nevada County, a lot of space around us. I see a lot of cattle. Are this is your cattle here surrounding us?
Yes.
So describe what it's like. You have a history. You even were in Colorado, I understand, way back in the day when you were a mere peanut. You were a small, younger guy working in Colorado as a rancher.
I bought cattle all over the West Slope for 6 years straight. But as far as actually run cattle, no, we've been right here.
And was this a family operation when you started?
This has been family right here. My mother's people since 1895. My father's people came here in a wagon train 1871.
Oh boy! And so today, how many cattle do you handle?
We've got 400 total head on my operation right now.
That takes a lot of water, I imagine.
It takes a lot of water, yes.
So where are they? Are they all in one spot, or do you have to run across the countryside to handle managing these animals?
4,400 acres spread all over western Nevada County. A little bit in Placer, a little bit in Yuba.
And are you the only one, or do you have help?
You're looking at the crew.
Oh, gee. How do you do it? I always thought a ranch has a lot of cowboys.
You're looking at the crew, 16-hour days, pretty straight.
That's tough. Well, describe to me what it's like, and what's your day look like when you on a typical day like today, which is summer.
We got up, we started irrigating water on 4 separate places. We have irrigating water running 4 separate places right now. Then we had meat customers here, where we sell our product out to the consumer. We're a vertically integrated company from birth to delivery to the consumer itself. And now I'm here doing this, and I'm going off to build fence. Then I'm coming back and move a herd of cattle. And it'll be 8:30 when I finish tonight.
It doesn't sound like anything's very easy, especially building that fence, as you were telling me earlier. How do you build a fence through rock, solid rock?
Well, this takes some imagination now, okay? This fence is kind of looks like Helen Keller built it, okay? Because you go up to the rock, and I will manufacture a jack that will allow me to go around the rock in a circle and still keep the fence fairly straight. And then I go down the hill to the next rock, and that's the way I do it.
I'll be darned. Well, hopefully today we'll see one of these things, maybe.
We don't have anything that tough around here right now, but yeah, it takes some imagination to do this, yes.
Hey, well, let's take a walk into one of your irrigated fields where the cows are grazing, and maybe we could talk about how you manage the water supply during a limited time like this.
Yeah. Okay, we can do this.
Let's do it.
Yeah. Okay.
So, Jim, this is one of many different pieces of land that you lease, right? And you put your cattle on it. Is that how this works?
Any place there's a blade of grass, I've tried to put a cow out there to eat it. You betcha.
So, how many acres are we looking at here?
This right here field is 60 acres.
And how many cattle do you have on it?
23.
For how long?
Till they finish. It's a continuous deal. I bring the ones that are closest to finishing, bring them here. This piece of land finishes. The clover is very strong feed here.
Oh, wow. So show me some of this clover you're talking about.
Well, we're going to walk out here to do that.
Okay, let's do that. But Jim, these are the cloves that you're talking about.
Clover.
Clover. Did somebody plant seeds a long time ago here, or did you do it this year?
Oh no, this has been here since my great grandfather.
Which goes back to like 1800 something.
1895, yeah.
Oh boy, a lot of history here. So what do you have in your hand?
This is a piece of red clover. We deal with two completely different ecosystems here. The irrigated pasture and the dry land. No species really transfers from one ecosystem to the other. The ones that are here in the irrigated pasture will not survive out there on the dry land and vice versa. So these were introduced here years and years ago, and this is what gets the cattle just as fat as they can be. Yeah.
So it's between the clover and the grasses you have out here and the fodder that you supplement with that makes this cattle so delicious.
Yes, exactly. My customers have said, almost 100% of them, that they want the cattle raised right off these clovers. We have this clover, and then we also have this white one right here. This is Ladino clover. And we have a third one, Salina strawberry, but I don't see any of it right here. So I can't. It has a little pink flower.
Do they each provide a different nutrient value?
They're pretty well alike. The cattle will selectively graze them if they can.
And so, how do you water this kind of area to keep it green? I mean, we're dry now here in California.
Yeah. See the sprinklers right here behind us?
Let me stand up and take a look.
This irrigates part of the field. Part of the field's irrigated by flood out of the ditch up here, where you see the difference between the green and the brown above it. The brown above it is just dry land, no irrigation up there. But this is a work in progress. We're slowly burying these sprinklers here, and then we irrigate out of that dam right up there. And now we're having to pump the water. But at some point, we're going to have the water stored up on top of the hill, and then we'll be able to irrigate strictly with gravity. No more energy.
And so that water that's behind that dam that we see, that's an earthen dam. That's from NID Water? It's a water purveyor that you purchased that from?
Yes.
Okay, and then you have a lot of sprinkler heads across this whole field. How do you do this at night? When do you turn them on?
We irrigate 2.5 days out of 10 here, and then the water goes to our other neighbors. They use it the other 7.5 days, and it comes again. And we irrigate just on the 7 of these sprinkler lines, 1 a day, and the water's used, and then it's moved to the next sprinkler line the next day.
Oh, okay. So it's a very organized fashion. So you minimize on your evaporation rate and get it to perk into the ground.
And we minimize on any loss going down the creek. You know, we try to keep any water from being wasted. You know.
Well, tell me about the cattle that are grazing off it right now behind us. They're coming closer. I think they kind of like us a little bit.
These cattle are raised here on the grass. All they have to eat is what you see under our feet right here, other than they are supplemented with salt, because we don't have enough salt in the ground for them to get what they need nutritionally. But they get the grass-fed fodder in once a day. They're moved off the green feed at night. This makes a big difference in the survivability of the irrigated pasture. So they're out on the dry land, and it does wonders for the cattle too, because they have to walk around out there on that hard dirt half the time, and this keeps their hoofs healthy. They don't get foot rot near so bad. if at all, when they're out on the dry land part of the time.
Well, I never realized that you have to move them off and on the grassy pasture areas and other areas that there's not a whole lot going on. But, I mean, they look very healthy. How old are these cows that we're seeing behind us?
Cattle here are long yearlings, which means that they're about 18 months. And they are just about ready to go. Next week, this white one right here is one of the ones that will go next week. Yeah.
And then when you say will go, where will they go?
They go to the University of Nevada at Reno for processing.
Okay, so that's where they're cut up into the pieces that ultimately we see at the store. Is that right?
And on your table, yes.
And at my table. I'll be darned. Well, it's nice to know that an animal that we're actually consuming, it becomes part of our own body, is as healthy as you keep them here at this ranch.
You know, what they're fed and how they're treated translates directly into the quality of the product. And my little company is based on one thing and one thing only: the quality of the product that I produce. That's it. And if it's not as high as I can make it, then I've got to do whatever it takes to make it that high.
Well, I have had a taste of your product, and it is quite good, and I would recommend that to everybody. I think we're capturing a lot of attention behind us right now, and you said the herd would never come to us. Take a look at this. You know, I've always been curious about this. Every time I see a cow, I see it standing on its legs. Do they ever lay down?
Oh, yes. Yeah, they lay down to go to sleep. Probably 20-25% of the time, which is usually at night. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I never realized that.
Yeah, and they take, but now they're up here and all they're interested in is feeding on grass and that's why I put them out of here. See, because when they're in here, they eat. You put them out there, and they go out and just lay down under the trees and enjoy life in the evening, and but when they're in here, they're bearing down on grazing.
Well, they sure are now. Take a look at these guys. Yeah. Every single day. So one cow requires how much time to reach maturity and harvest time?
Well, they're, I'll take the cattle, and I'm going to take the cows to Coles, for instance, okay? And I'll come out here and I'll say, well, all right, if I take this one and I take that one and I take this one, they'll all get to harvest time at the same time. I've been doing this all my life, and every time I do that, it looks just like Mutt and Jeff picked the whole thing, okay? It really does, because every animal has different genetics, and they will grow and finish at different rates.
What do you look for in an animal to come up with the realization that it's time?
Well, let's look at this big roan steer here. And look at the red roan steer number 4 and the blue roan steer number 44 right next to him. You look at that red roan steer there, he's round. He isn't angular like this other one is. The red roan steer, he's ready to go right now. The blue one, he's got a month and a half, 2 months to go yet. You look at how they fill out, how they've covered over with fat,
Is most of their fat around the belly part or shoulders?
Covers the whole animal. Covers the whole animal. Yeah. Yeah. So, but I mean, there you have this blue one. You could see his backbone standing up there like that. For that red roan there, the strawberry roan, his backbone is round.
Yeah, you almost don't see it. This one closest to us here, he's just now, yeah.
Yeah, he's ready to go right now. And
I think he just heard his name called.
Well, I give them as good a life as they can possibly have for as long as they're here. And, that's just part of the game that, they give their lives, like you said, for us to eat. Yeah, that's just the way it is.
And it's important that we appreciate what has transpired.
What goes into it.
Jim, I guess there are a lot of ways that you can feed these animals. You can feed them by bringing in by bringing in alfalfa and things like that, right? We see a lot of that. We hear a lot about that. And then the more favored thing, I think, by a lot of people these days is to actually have a grazed animal grazing in a healthy field like we have behind us here. But I heard recently about another method of feeding, which is you use sprouts. You sprout the alfalfa or whatever it is.
Grass grown hydroponically.
Yeah, that is an amazing idea. And there's a guy who's here. His name's Kurt. And Kurt is, I guess, an expert at this. Why don't we go over and talk to him? I'd like to find out more about that.
Okay.
That looks mighty green and healthy. How did you come up with this?
Well, actually, I didn't come up with this. This is Mother Nature. So this has been around actually for centuries. People have sprouted grains and fed, and in fact, history is on any grains that they ground flour out of up until the combine. It all sprouted because it was shocked up. It was held in a shock. It get a little moisture on it, and it'd sprout just a tiny bit, and they actually ground that grain for flour. So it's only been the last 150 years since the advent of modern farming practices that we don't sprout grains for our normal consumption. This product right here, that was sprouted in a particular type of a unit that controls the environment so it sprouts it very efficiently and very consistently. That technology is fairly new, but realistically there are patents over 100 years old for sprouting grain in this fashion.
Is it a very complicated effort to do it in a healthy way and in a way that provides a high level of product in the end?
It's really not too complicated, other than it's just the more precise the machine operates, the better your output will be. In other words, if you're trying to sprout this at home, the temperature matters because there are some certain inherent issues, whether it doesn't grow fast enough, if the temperature's too cold. If the temperature gets way too hot because of the high moisture level, then you'll have some other negative issues that will come up. You might have some molds or something like that. So the reason that it works well in the system is that it actually controls the environment very carefully so that it's very consistent.
So I guess the bottom line is, do the animals like it? Do you find that most animals eat this?
We find that all animals eat this, and they actually, after they acquire a taste for it, which takes anywhere from a few hours to a couple of days, you can walk out in the field anywhere with this, and they will chase you down to get it. They love it.
Wow. Jim, is that the experience that you've had using this product?
Yes. This man here would give me some of this stuff, right? And I'd throw it over the fence, and the cows would look at it, nose it around, you know. Finally, I got them to eat it, all right, because it is, you got to teach them how to eat it. It's an acquired taste. But once they learn to eat this stuff, they will walk off and leave the best alfalfa for this stuff right here.
That's great. So let's take a closer look at this. It looks like it's sitting on a rubber mat or something. What's on the bottom of this?
Well, actually, what you have here is this bottom portion of this is actually just the root mass of the seeds. So it's actually grown right on a surface. So there's no soil, there's no fertilizers, there's nothing in there. So when this is fed, not only do they eat the green sprout on top, but they actually eat the root mass in addition. So there is nothing wasted on this product. And nutritionally, the root mass actually has nearly as much energy as the green has on top. A little bit of difference in the vitamins and the enzymes, because enzymes are contained in the green portion, which are highly beneficial for the animal's nutrition. So they'll eat the entire content of this product. So there's nothing wasted.
So really, we're just talking about a seed and a little water, and voila, you have a huge base of food here.
That is correct. And based on what we're talking about today as far as drought relief and just water conservation, this product uses about 3% of the water that's typically used to produce feed in a commercial environment. So you can grow acres and acres of farmland in a small system. And so if you think about it, if you save, 97% of the water to produce that feed, that's a significant savings as far as water usage goes.
Is this something that's actually being used, Jim, at many other ranches around the country, around the West? I still see a lot of animals in the fields.
He'd be a better man to ask that. What I know is it's being used every day right here.
That's pretty obvious. How about you, Kurt? Is it you're going to Colorado soon for some work? Or do you see things happening over there with respect to this kind of product?
Well, interestingly enough, and Jim talks about his ancestry here. On my wife's side of the family, there's long ancestry too, so they kind of knew each other 150 years ago. Cattle ranchers. Been around for a while, but we actually build this system right here in Nevada County. We literally ship them in all parts of the world. We ship everywhere in the United States, North America. We ship Central America, South America. We work with a company in Greece, with Belarus, India, Argentina, Paraguay, Ecuador. So this product is all around the world. So we actually find, especially here in the States, we have numerous commercial cow operators like Jim is, especially grass-fed beef operators in the U.S. In fact, one of the larger producers that supplies Whole Foods, they process several hundred to into the few thousands a week of beef. They actually use fodder to supplement on some of their ranches.
You know, I'm just curious, does the meat taste better if they've been eating a lot of this type of food?
My customers come back and have said that the way they want the beef to taste is supplemented with this stuff and off the clover that we raise out here in the open fields.
I think it's as being discussed as far as water usage, land use, all the things that we deal with in our environment. I think we need to look at these types of technology. This is still, I consider it to be in somewhat of its infancy. You know, we just now, in fact, here in the middle part of July, we'll be delivering a fully automated system. We have systems in design that will produce 20 to 50 ton a day. So they'll actually accommodate large operations. But environmentally, as far as environment's concerned, not only is the product itself green in its appearance, but it really does have a green effect on the earth because it uses less water. Tillage is non-existent. No chemical fertilizers, so there's no water runoffs, any of those types of things, and uses less land, which is becoming, all of those things are becoming more and more difficult to obtain, especially in the agricultural arena. You know, when you talk about water, you talk about agriculture and large amounts of land to grow food for people, we run into that situation where it's a finite amount. There's only so much water, there's only so much land. And if we aren't good stewards and we don't take good care of it, and Jim's one of those good stewards, he takes care of it and he thinks about it. If we don't do that, then we run into these issues where we have problems of no food or no water for this, that, or whatever it is. And so these are the types of technology and these types of things that will continue to come forth in the future as we go along. That will be helpful for everybody, not just here in Nevada County, but literally around the world.
Well, it looks like a wonderful product to me, and it sounds like you only have to add water, seeds, and probably some electricity, right?
A little bit of electricity, but again, it's a very small amount. So from an energy standpoint, it is very efficient. We have several customers around the U.S. that actually are powering theirs with solar power. Totally off-grid, don't use any grid power at all, so it's all solar power. So it lends itself to doing all the things that ultimately we will be doing so that we can continue to really to survive as humanity here on this earth.
Well, it seems like in a drought as we are right now in the fourth consecutive year of a drought, which is really nasty. Wells going dry, as you have already said, Jim, and of course the practices in the fields that this method truly can help us maintain a food source through these dry periods of time with the least amount of water. It makes a lot of sense to me. Hey, so we're standing in front of this huge freezer, which I guess receives all your product after it's harvested in Reno, right? It comes back here.
And it looks huge, but by the time you get 7 animals in there, it ain't very big at all. All right, here's a New York steak. Just so this is cut into in this box is 1/8 of an animal, and that's what your beef looks like. And that marbling you see in the beef right there, that's where the taste comes from.
So the marbling is the fat that you see every so often in here? Yeah. And yeah, it tastes so good.
Well, you've bought it. You should know, yes.
I do know.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this is 1/8 of a beef that we would sell to an individual to take home and put in their freezer.
Give me an idea of, I know it varies depending on the year, but what would it cost for 1/8 of an animal?
There you go. $322 for that 1/8.
We're talking about a variety of different types of steaks in here. You have a lot of different things, including ground beef. Is that right?
This is what you get. This is your cut sheet for this 1/8 of an animal by package count and by weight. right down the line.
And just reading a few of these, it looks so tasty to me. We've got tri-tip, filet mignon, cross rib roast, back ribs, lots of round roast, ground beef, New York steaks. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff here. London broil, stew meats.
Yeah, that's right. This is what you get. Every new customer gets a cookbook.
Oh, this is new. I don't have my cookbook yet, but I haven't bought from you recently, so I think I need to.
Yeah, this because I found out the first year I did this that people didn't know how to cook grass-fed beef. The fat in this, even though it looks like there's a lot of fat there, there's actually a lot less than you would get in a corn-fed animal, and it's a totally different fat. If you don't cook it different, this will get dry and you will not enjoy it.
So what do you add? What type of fat do you add when you're cooking this kind of meat?
You don't add anything. You cook it different.
Oh.
That's what the cookbook's for.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, give us a clue, but of course we want everybody to go out and get that cookbook.
Yeah.
Give us a clue what one would look at.
Faster with less heat.
Faster with less heat. Okay, yeah. I get it.
Yes. And then it will stay moist and you will enjoy it. If you cook it the same way, it will get very dry. You will not enjoy it.
Can this cookbook be purchased at Briar Patch or some other places around Nevada County?
We got it offline, but every new customer gets a cookbook.
Okay, well, we're encouraging new customers to give this guy, Jim Gates, a call because he's got wonderful beef. I've had it myself almost all the time now. We're eating your beef, not anywhere else, and I highly recommend it. I want to thank you so much for your time away. I know you'd rather be putting in fences right now.
Gotta be done, whether you like it or not. Whether you'd rather be doing it has nothing to do with it.
Anyhow,
it's just got to be done because the cows won't stay in without it.
This is true, and I thank you for your time here. And it's so important that we watch our water. It's so important also that we consider water use for food. And meat is something that's very much a part of our lives for a healthy life, anyhow. So carry on and carry that baton to the next person. The way you take care of animals here is wonderful, and the product in the end is also wonderful. They have a good life, and they're giving us a good life too.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Everybody, goes ahead together.
Yeah.
This is a team effort. It's not a individual thing.
Right. Well, you're demonstrating that here at this location for sure. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you.
Jim and his family go way back in time. He's told us something like the late 1800s. The family's been around, and all that time they've been ranching. They've been growing food for themselves and all of us. And what I really learned today is this water that is flowing in our environment is so very important, not only for the water we drink and for the environment, but also for the food that we eat. Jim is really a testament that if you're very careful and prudent and frugal in your use of water, and you know about your product, in his case, how to take good care of animals, that we can have a very reliable food supply. It's pretty. It's something that I'm going to be remembering every time that I go to the supermarket and pick up a steak. I'm going to remember of all those decisions that had to be made by a rancher like Jim Gates, to come up with this product that's so delicious and so nutritious for me today. Thanks everybody for coming. Bye-bye.
Tonight's presenter, Steve Baker, will focus on groundwater and the drought. Steve is a registered geologist and a California certified hydrologist, and he's worked with groundwater issues for over 29 years. So he's very qualified to speak to us tonight. Steve has produced radio shows on complex water issues in the United States and in India. And he was awarded in 2012 the National Groundwater Association's special recognition for his achievements in local and regional water issues. He now focuses on bringing people together to solve their own complex water problems. He's the founder of Operation Unite and Living Water programs. So, Steve, I introduce you here.
Okay.
It's all yours.
All right, well, thank you very much for inviting me to talk with everybody, Peggy, and really the people at Nevada County Climate Change Coalition. It's great to be here and share some of the things I've been working on for such a long time. The world has been talking a lot about climate change. I think we're all well aware of that. And the discussions about climate change have hit all levels of government and all levels of society, from the islands of Tuvalu to Russia, United States, the European areas, South America, everywhere. And during those discussions, we have noticed that there's a wide array of extreme weather that we encounter. Weather conditions that far exceed the normal weather that people associate with their regional areas, which is indicative of climate change. And so today's drought in California is really a perfect example. We're being visited by extremes in weather here with our drought. And this drought that we're experiencing is unusual when you compare it to the amount of water that we usually receive, or usually have received in the last 150 years. It's quite different. And it's a lot less, unfortunately. And at the same time, we have a lot of people now living in California as compared to those days when the Native Americans or the Native people were living here. A lot fewer people back then. But during this period of time, people have been responding. We don't hear about it. We hear about the climate change. Is it because of the humans? Is it because of the natural settings? What's really going on here? But while those conversations continue, we have people already responding. And I'd like to share with you today some of these faces. Thus, we have faces in a drought. I have been interviewing people since 2006 for various water issues, some of which were the issue that we've been dealing with currently in the Central Valley and all relationships associated with that. The goal I have for this evening is to point out that we, the people of California, the people of other states, other countries, we're the ones that can turn this around. It's not a politician. It's not some governmental agency. It's you and me making decisions on a daily basis as to how to adjust our lifestyles to be more adaptable, to handle not having as much of a resource that we normally do, to handle using less energy where we can, because there are ramifications to climate change that will affect our society. I'll explain some climate change fundamentals, but really I was going to stay away from a lot of science today. We'll visit with some of the groundwater concerns that we have here in California, and I'll mention other places as well. And then lastly, point a direction for you to move in. Those are the areas that we'll talk about. But I'd like to introduce you to some people that I have met along my travels discussing and finding out more about climate change and how society is responding. Belinda Stewart's in the center with the Klamath Water Users Association. When I visited with Belinda, I found that she was working on a lot of post-lawsuits. What she learned is, if you want to deal with droughts, if you want to deal with lack, you don't sue each other. Not productive. Everybody loses. She's dealing with the native peoples. She's dealing with the municipalities, with a lot of farmers, and that's what they learned as a group, everybody coming together as a group, learning that. Mo McBroom is from Washington. I met her in Seattle. She's with the Washington, it's an environmental coalition. She's an attorney. She works at the legislative level in the state of Washington, trying to move legislation in a way that's balanced with the environment, balanced with the needs of the people. On the bottom row, Rochelle Klein, here on the left, I met her at one of the food distribution centers in Selma, it's the city of Selma in the Central Valley. She was distributing 70,000 meals that day. This was back in 2010. Center, lower pictures, John Lane. John's an Ohio farmer. They do things different there. In Ohio, they don't irrigate. It's dry irrigation. When it rains, you get the rain, the crops get the rain. When it doesn't rain, they're not going to get the rain. He's learned how to manage his issues of drought or no drought, and that's with insurance. That's what he learned. When we look outside, when we jump in our cars and travel around, we see beautiful terrain, and sometimes we forget that it wasn't always this way. It has changed tremendously through time. At one time, the Sierras between here and Highway 50, well, in fact, if you go west on Highway 50, you're up by Strawberry. Are you familiar with that? Okay, you look off your right shoulder. Wow, volcanics all over the place because we had volcanoes. We had lava flows back in the day, hundreds of thousands of years ago. You look to the left, it's another wow, but it's a different kind. It's granitic rock. That's where the granite rock pushed its way up, lifting up the Sierra Nevada mountains, creating even higher mountains than what we see now. They've been deformed and degraded a lot from erosion. There have been many spells through the hundreds and thousands of years of dryness and of wetness. It changes. Mother Nature works that way, and that's how the earth works. It's always changing, very, very dynamic. But if you look at the recent past, the last 150 years, what you would notice in the data is we've been in a relatively abundant wet season. It's been great. But now, the new millennium, from 2000 up to present, we're noticing that we're getting a lot more dry periods than we are wet periods. In fact, right now, we're in the fourth consecutive year of a drought that is not just a little bit of a drought. It's a very significant drought. And that is why we have so many people for so many years having worked together, or maybe not so much together, but trying to come up with a better world that can be adaptable to the new conditions. You probably have asked, you may already know this, how would you ever know what the climate conditions were years ago? I mean, hundreds of thousands of years ago. How do you know? Well, the paleoclimatologists have a way of using proxy data, indirect evidence of what life was like back in the day, 100,000 years ago, 200,000 years ago, maybe just 10,000 years ago. They use mud from lake bottoms. How thick is the mud? Represents how much siltation, how much flooding occurred. They look closely at the mud. There are critters in there. They're dead. They've been gone a long time. But the microbes that are left can be looked at and identified and classified so that you know what type of conditions existed back in the day. Bubbles frozen in glaciers. That's like frozen atmosphere. You melt down a glacier, a chunk of that ice from, say, a couple thousand feet down in the Antarctic or the Arctic, and you can see what the CO2 levels were. It's really good stuff, especially for a scientist. Wood cores, I think everybody knows that. Every year there's another ring. Well, if you look at the bristlecone pine tree, they go way back. And so it's an excellent record as to what our climate was like many, many years ago. As far as climate change, the scientists typically look at or describe a changing climate through something called forcing and something else called feedback. Forcing is when there's an external activity that has an effect on climate. And an example of that, two examples of that, would be volcanic activity. Typically, if there's volcanic activity, it's going to cool the atmosphere. If you want to warm or cool a planet, you can if you notice changes in the sun, what the sun's putting out as far as energy, the inclination of the earth, how it wobbles, all those types of things, that has an effect, and most definitely has had an effect on creating periods of glaciation in years past. Those are called forcings. And greenhouse gases is another forcing. It can, carbon dioxide can be a forcing a climate to change, or it can actually be a feedback loop, which I'll explain in a moment. Ozone, halocarbons, nitrous oxide, methane, all these things are absorbers of energy and can cause climate change. Now, water is one of the biggest ones. But the difference between water and, say, carbon dioxide is water's in the atmosphere only a few days to a week, and then it drops. It condenses, it drops out. But these other things, they aren't the type of thing that condenses and falls out. Carbon dioxide is going to hang out for over 800 years. That's why if we stop producing carbon dioxide now, we'll have to wait a long time for the effects to slowly slow down and eventually go away. In the meantime, we're not a society anymore as we are right now, because if we don't adapt fast enough, we're going to have a problem. Now, feedback loops. Feedback loops are as a result of a forcing. So if you have, I show two examples, although there are a lot of different feedback loops. An example of a positive feedback would be an increase in temperature. You go outside and you notice, wow, it's a little bit warmer than it usually is. Well, that warmth, that extra warmth you can think of that as, well, that means we're going to have more evaporation. And if there's more evaporation, we're going to have more water vapor in our atmosphere. Well, if there's more water vapor in the atmosphere, we're going to enhance greenhouse effects, because water's one of those molecules that will absorb energy. That's a feedback loop. And then it goes around and around and around. A negative feedback would be an increase in temperature, which causes evaporation, right? So there's more water vapor going into the atmosphere. Well, that creates low clouds. Well, low clouds produce a cooling effect. It reflects a lot of the energy from the sun back out into space while it cools down what's underneath it. Totally the opposite if we have high clouds, like cirrus clouds, very high in our atmosphere. Opposite effect. In that case, you'll have minimal reflection back to outer space, but you'll have increase in temperature on Earth. The cloud aspect of all the modeling is one of the most complicated and not understood facets of what climatologists are looking at. So the big question that creates such controversy is, are human impacts the cause of climate change? And I thought this particular slide really says it all. If you look at the graphs, there's three of them. One's for the globe, one's for just the land on our planet, and the other one's for only the ocean. They ran a whole bunch of models. It's trying to simulate what would life have been like according to the models. These are mathematical algorithms from 1900 and 2000, and then they compared the results with the actual results, what actually existed between 1900 and now. And what they found, when they only put into the model natural stuff, natural conditions, ran the models 1 million times, all kinds of different models, what they came up with is what you see in blue. Then they added to the natural consequences what happens when you also have the anthropogenic activities. And that's what you see in pink. It's us. We're causing what has happened in the last 100, 150 years. We really are. Now, a while back, I had a great opportunity to meet this man, Dr. Ben Santer. He works for the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. He's a climatologist there. Trained in Europe, came to the United States, trained a little more, been with Lawrence Livermore Labs for about over 21 years. And I asked him about the real likelihood that people could have an effect on an entire planet. Come on. How many times has he heard that question? And he said he's heard it a lot. Here's what he said to me.
Sure, I hear that a lot. This is a frequent argument that nothing puny humans could do could have any impact on global scale climate or on the oceans, on the atmosphere globally. And we know that's not true. Look at the Great Garbage Patch. You can see our plastic from space. Look at the acidification of the oceans. We've measured that. We know that that increasing acidification is due to us. It's the ocean drawing down atmospheric CO2, producing weak carbonic acid and acidifying the oceans. We've measured that. We know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that we have changed the chemical composition of the atmosphere. Here at Livermore and at many other locations, people make these measurements of isotopes of carbon. And we know from looking at those isotopic measurements that most of the roughly 30% increase in atmospheric CO2 since the Industrial Revolution, from roughly 250, 260 parts per million to now the historic threshold of 400 parts per million, most of that increase is us, 75 to 80%. Again, that's not a belief system or idle speculation. We know that from hard science, that we have changed the chemical composition of the atmosphere.
Very subtle changes, and let me give you an example. Let's say we take a couple shovels of dirt and we move it on our property to another location. Let's just say that we just threw those 2 or 3 shovels of dirt into a little dip, a little drainage area that diverts the rainwater that normally would continue to flow down and go into a fracture, which eventually leads to our well and fills it up. Well, now it's diverted, that water flow is diverted in another direction. That discrete pathway has changed just because of a few shovelfuls of dirt. It can be that, I'm oversimplifying, but it can be something relatively simple that could cause quite a change in that type of environment. One thing about fractured rock is there are a lot of unknowns. You don't know how many fractures there are. You don't know how they're connected to one another. You don't know how they're not connected, which is even the bigger concern, to one another. There's a lot of uncertainty in just that one tiny little piece of our Earth. You could have 2 wells side by side, but they behave totally differently because they are attached to a different fracture system. And even their water quality can be different. And by looking at those connections or disconnections, I asked to go through the records and see how many wells exist, and this is a low number compared to what really exists. How many wells exist within a 6-mile by 6-mile square? It's a township range. And I plotted all this data on this map. Western Nevada County has a ton of wells. As you go east, of course, you can see the distribution is much, much less. Our vulnerabilities exist more so on the western half of our county. We need to be careful because, think about it. We have, a little over 100,000 people living here. Did you know we have 30,000 wells that have been drilled, and this is the small number. Some of them went away, some of them may be on the same property, but when it's all said and done, we probably have about 30,000 active wells. The average household size in our county is 2. So those 30,000 wells represent 60,000 people, but we have a little over 100,000 people living here. Over 60% of our people live on wells. So who's watching? Who's managing their water supply up here? I don't really know of anybody. And it's dangerous, except for Nick. Nick's doing it, and that's good. You're a success story, and I'd like to talk to you about that. So what's going to happen when we have consecutive years of dryness, as we do now? What's going to happen if this goes to a 5th year and a 6th year? You know, Australia has a 12-year drought that they're dealing with. Okay? Should we plan for a 12-year drought? How's that going to affect an aquifer like we have, which has low storativity? The rocks we have in a fractured rock environment only store 1 to 5% of that rock mass can have water in it, and that water's only in the fractures. Okay, a little reality check. Here's a graph that shows water levels. This is just one well. There are many wells. They all look and behave differently. But my point in showing you this one is we have water levels going up and down and up and down, and I'm concerned about when they go down, their maximum lowest drop during the year. And you can see at times we're dropping and we're dropping and we're dropping in October at the worst part of the year. If that drops below your pump intake, if that drops below the fracture that produces the water, you're going dry, or you're going to lose a lot of water. So this particular well got within a year of losing its water. And then fortunately, we had a high precip year and things turned around. We're vulnerable. That's the point. A successful well is a function of what Mother Nature's bringing, but also how you're using your well and how you're using your groundwater. If we look at groundwater in another dimension, this is a cross-section. Water basically goes from the top of the hill, flows underground, accumulates within the sandy zones, and starts moving in a directly down gradient, as if you're rolling a stone down the hill. And in this case, imagine that pump is not on, it's not operating. That water from the top of the hill will infiltrate, get into the groundwater flow, and eventually show up in the creek, in the river. Let's say that's the Yuba River. Now we turn the pump on. It causes this deformation, the curve of the water table changes. So now, because our pump is on, in this example, the water doesn't go past the well to get to the river anymore. So the river's not receiving that water anymore. In fact, the stream or the river, the Yuba River in this case, it's losing its water on top of everything else because it's getting captured in part by the well that I have on. These are the small little changes that have a huge effect of areas around what we are doing as far as how we stress in a particular aquifer. Okay, so how serious is our current drought? Do you see yourself doing something like this? Hauling your own water on your head, as we were doing in India? In fact, there's no way I could hold that on my head. There's a guy in the back who's like this, holding it up so I don't drop it. That's how we got that picture. Now, what about surface water storage? California has an infrastructure already put together, and it has a capacity to hold about 3 years' worth of water for the state. Now, on top of that, our normal, on this? Okay. Our snowpack has an additional year, usually. A normal thickness of a snowpack gives us another year, approximately, of a good year, like how much water California used in 2010. Okay, so effectively, we have about 4 years of buffer. And if we listen to our governor, if we listen to our regional leaders and reduce our water, we could stretch that to a 5-year serious drought or a 6-year serious drought. But after that, who knows what's going to happen? Okay, so we have to be careful with even the water that NID provides, because a lot of that water, or all of that water, is service water. We have to listen to what the requests are as far as reducing our water usage. We need to stretch it out. We don't know what the 5th year is going to bring. We don't know if next year is going to be a good one or not. Climate change affects everybody. To give you another reality check, I listed all the droughts we've had in the last 152 years. There's 13 of them. And if you notice the duration in the column on your right, they were 2 or 3 years. And now they're 4 years, they're 6 years, then it'll drop to 2 years. But we're seeing longer duration droughts as time progresses. And while we see that here in California, we are seeing places like Australia, places in South America, and other countries where they're having to deal with very significantly difficult dry periods of time. So it's what's going on in various parts of the globe. I don't know about you, but I've heard people say, this is a political drought. This is not, something created by Mother Nature. It's a political drought because our politicians have decided where the water goes and where the water does not go. Well, you know what? I mean, that's not a scientific principle, but there are different types of droughts. One drought is a meteorological drought. Basically, how dry is it based on a normal for an area? Page down. Here is a graph of precipitation where we live, in Grass Valley. Anywhere from less than 10 to a little over 90 inches per year. So what's normal? What's normal here? It's all over the map. High variability is classic precipitation in California. It can be really good or really bad. So it's hard to say what's normal, what's not normal. But I would say 4 consecutive years of the dryness that we've experienced in California these days is certainly a drought, not only a political. Well, there's also an agricultural drought. This type of drought is based on if there's not enough water to actually create problems. If because of the lack of water, your crops are not yielding what they should, that's considered an agricultural drought. There are a lot of ways that can happen, and I list a few here, but that is a concern, and you can be sure, next page please, that we have that problem right now in the Central Valley and a lot of other places here in California. I want to introduce you to Joe Del Bas, the gentleman on the right with the cowboy hat on. Joe's a family farmer. He grows tomatoes, he grows some almonds, he grows a lot of cantaloupes, he grows a few other things which I don't remember. His dad worked on the farms, and now he's worked on the farms. He's very much into focusing on what's going on in the water, in the field of water. Governor Schwarzenegger asked him to be representing that area back in 2010 on the water commission that we have in our state. When President Obama came to visit with us back a year ago, February, it was on his farm. They landed Air Force One on his farm. Aida and I were actually there when they landed. We didn't get within 200 yards of the president, but we were there. So I'd like you to hear what Joe has to say about his approach to dealing with these shortages of water.
We came into this year with less water carried over from last year. That's an important part of our water portfolio, is conserving water and saving it and having some water to carry forth into the new year. And we had less water coming into this year. Now, we had a huge cut in water deliveries this year, and so that carryover was very vital to us. We probably would be out of business if we didn't have that right now. But we are able to get by this year, just cut down to the bone in our crops, and at the end of this year, we will have probably zero water to go into next year. So we're facing quite a critical year next year if we don't get more water than we got this year.
What's so interesting in what you're looking at here is Ron Milligan, who's next to him, the next picture over. You would think they would have an antagonistic relationship because the decisions that Ron's office, the Bureau of Reclamation, makes has an effect on how much water Joe gets. But it's not like that, because when you're in droughts, you work together. If you don't want to work together, it's going to be a bad time. These guys work together. Ron he's the middleman who has to make these decisions with his staff. And he's going to explain to you now how he makes those decisions and give you an idea of the complexities of that.
Some folks ask, okay, well, how do you divide up the water? And it's imperative from my position, I need to get multiple uses out of a single acre foot of water. I need to be able to take an acre foot, schedule it in a way that I can get power generation from that. Need to do it in a way that it provides flow in the river for fish at the right time, that water then actually creates the flow habitat all the way down to the delta, helps manage the salinity regime with the tides, then can be pumped, delivered to a farmer on the west side of the San Joaquin Valley. That's just 1 acre foot, and some folks like to say, well, okay, it's 1 acre foot for the fish and then 1 acre foot for the farmer. It's got to be, dual use as it goes through the system. And that's what my staff does on a daily basis. And all that coordination with those other agencies is about asking them, okay, what flexibility, when do you need certain things? And then we try to then put that all together into a coherent package.
As you can tell, it's complicated. It's not easy. It's not 1 acre foot goes here and another acre foot goes there, and when you spread it all out, it's cool. You have multiple uses. That's the main point. Very difficult to do when you have contracts to satisfy, and fairness is of the utmost in need as you're going through this, including the environment. Anybody know where this is? Nick? Yeah, it's exactly where it is. That's where Joe saves his water. That's where he gets his water. If he can save water, it stays in the San Luis Reservoir. That was taken in December. Okay? Bad news. There's more of that reservoir above the water level than below. Right now, we're looking at, in our region, Folsom, Shasta, and Oroville. Okay? Those three very significant storage reservoirs for our drinking water, for water to grow our crops, they're a little more than half full. At this time of year, Folsom 72% from where it should be, Shasta's 65%, and Oroville's 56% from where it should be at this time of year. That's not good. That's not good at all. And what about the groundwater? When the surface water is not available to a farmer in the Central Valley, they've got to come up with something. What choices do they really have? Well, they pump groundwater. But you've all heard what happens with groundwater in the Central Valley. For years, for decades, we've been pumping so much water out of the Central Valley that it has lost its elevation. The land has subsided. I mean, a lot. And not just that, but of course you're dewatering the aquifer. Well, that water is fossil water. The reason why that water is there is because we, back in the day, during another climate change episode, had thousands of feet of glaciers, of ice, sitting on top of California. And when that melted off, it melted towards the Central Valley, brought all the sediment with it, filling that up, and all the water with it. We're pumping that water, for the most part, out of the ground, certainly from those deeper zones that they're pumping from right now. So the cost to operate minimally at a farm is really high. When farmers make decisions on their crops, they make them in December. Well, in December, who knows how much water is coming in February, in March, and April? Who knows? They have to guess. They're committed. So it's, for a farmer, this is really a very tough circumstance. The food that California puts out, it's 25% of the food in the nation. Okay? We have to be careful, as farmers are. It's no easy thing to make a decision on taking a farmer out of production. There are a lot of things you can do to manage them, maybe choose different crops, but they need to make those decisions. But there's only so much water. And so they have to come up with something, because we are feeding not only our country, but we're feeding other countries as well. Next slide, please. Anybody know where this is? It's ground zero. Where do you think that is? The Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. Sort of the different views of it. We were out actually on the water with a media group one time, and they were showing us different areas. A lot of farming surrounding the Delta. And the remedy for getting more water to the Central Valley a long time ago was to use an inland estuary as important as this one. In fact, it's the biggest one in the western side of our continent. Okay? It's unusual because it's an inland estuary. It's a great place. The diversification at the Delta is over the top. Now, if you start manipulating how water flows through there, at some point it's going to have an effect on the life in the Delta. And of course, they have their own farmers too, so the stresses that a farmer in the Central Valley experiences are the same stresses that a farmer experiences in the Delta. Up until the 70s, the diversions that did occur didn't cause any great alarm. But as the 70s progressed and then afterwards, we started pumping a lot more water out of the Delta, diverting it and sending it to southern destinations. And as a result of that, a lot of things started to be noticed. Pelagic fish of different sorts, in particular the Delta smelt, was found to be endangered. And so in 2009, 2010, I think it was 2009, the federal regs kicked in and they said, hey, you can't divert that water. Certainly during February, because February is when the Delta smelt that only lives in the Delta moves from location A to the location B. Well, that takes them right past the pumps. When the pumps are on, the fish can't fight the current and they get eaten up by the pumps. And you lose a lot of Delta smelt in this case. So that's when all the runoff is happening. February is when you divert as much water as you can to fill up San Luis Reservoir and other places. They weren't allowed to do it anymore. Environment gets the water first, and then you go down the pecking order. Everyone else gets the water. If you're in a drought, okay, You go down to here because it's a drought, you only have this much water. Environment gets its water, and then everybody else has to share the rest. Tough decisions are made. Ron Milligan's right in the middle of it. Joe is a recipient, or not, of some of that water. Next slide, please. Now, there have been, and there continue to be, many people who are looking at the Delta and being very vocal about the ramifications of some of the proposals right now. I'd like to introduce you to several people. Melinda Terry is on top center. She is with the North Delta Water Agency and the California Central Valley Flood Control Association. Public safety's #1. That's her job. She lives in the Delta. She said, I'm the only one that knows why those levees are there. No one living there seems to know why they're there. I mean, if you had a breach of those levees, if they're not constructed properly, and there are many miles of levees that do have issues, there's also many miles of levees that are in good shape. But anyhow, it can be a real problem during flooding times. And so her concern is to somehow always stay ahead of it so that you don't have a breach of some sort or a break that would cause hardship to those living in that area. Jeff Michaels, he's on the left. He's an economist with the University of the Pacific. His concerns are looking at the economic ramifications and the benefits of some of the proposed changes, like the peripheral tunnel that has been proposed in the Delta to divert water. And he has a lot to say about how really it's not the best use of our money to spend it on the tunnel. We need a different kind of project. There are a lot of different ways to look at it, but that's where he is coming from. But I'd like to introduce you to Bill Jennings, the man with the pipe on the right side. Outspoken, he knows what he's talking about. I sat down with him for a while. Again, he's with the Sports Fishing Protection Alliance, and he is a main spokesperson for the Restore the Delta grassroots organization down in Stockton. I asked him, what are the minimum conditions that you need to be in the Delta, existing in the Delta, so that things are safe and healthy? And here's what he had to say.
Wow, I mean, some fish prosper in the open water, some along shallow shorelines. I mean, it's completely variable. But there are certainly certain chemical and physical parameters that have to be met, because we're talking about species that evolved over eons, many hundreds of thousands of years, to a habitat. And they fill all of the many niches in that habitat. But in the space of relatively few decades, we interrupted half the flow that historically flowed through this estuary, and we turned the remaining hydrograph on its head. Periods when it was wet are now dry, periods that were historically dry are now wet. And the biological communities were simply not able to adapt to this massive change. But that's similar to every estuary in the world. No estuary in the world can withstand diversion of half its waters. Massive change of its hydrograph, especially when you're using it as a sewer to transport wastes. Historically flowed through this estuary, and we turned the...
Now, Katie Patterson, she's in the center picture, lowest one. Katie works for the San Joaquin Farm Bureau. Now, with some of the proposed projects, these new projects, they're going to be moving levees around, and she's concerned that they could lose 1/5 of their farming areas. And she'll go ahead and explain that to you now. They're concerned about commitments. Promises made but not delivered. That's what they're concerned about. So go ahead and play that.
We try to keep some rational thought about the policies that are being presented here, but at the same time we understand that there are some processes that need to be mitigated for in terms of takings of land. And when you have processes such as the BDCP that's looking at initial, in the last year and a half, numbers of 100,000 acres of the Delta for their habitat restoration, and then when you hear Jerry Merrill with the Resources Department saying that this isn't meant to be a comprehensive habitat plan for the Delta, that there will probably need to be more on top of that, we start going, whoa, there's only 500,000 acres here, guys. What do you want from us? So there's a lot of skepticism in terms of what type of science, that arguable science that's going to be changing, who's going to be in charge of defining that this didn't work, now we need more, or we actually need to back off this and do less? So that really hasn't been defined, and so I think as we continue to move in these processes, we're going to continue to ask for those questions, because those are essential to our members having any assurances that this will actually go down as people are intending it to.
Now, the middle picture, center column, is Dr. Kenneth Cole. I very deliberately went down to see him at Moss Landing Marine Laboratories. I don't know how many times in the last probably 8 or 9 years, I've attended a lot of conferences, a lot of public meetings, and I hear engineers saying, any water that gets to the ocean is wasted water. And I wasn't quite understanding, I mean, I know from the human perspective why, but I wasn't really understanding, is that really true? I want to hear from a scientist who knows about that sort of thing. So, hey, I hooked up with the oceanographer, this gentleman, Dr. Cole. And I asked him to explain how fresh water flowing through the delta and the bays is important or not. And this is what he said.
I'd say the oceans would say, hey, give me back my estuaries. I need a place to put my fish. I need these ecosystems to help filter some of toxic substances that come off the watershed. I need that transition zone so that not as much of the waste products of society get into my world. So I think the oceans would say, hey, give us a break. Give me the sediments. Give me the products of weathering. Give me the freshwater supply and the refuge that freshwater has afforded our organisms, but keep your waste products to yourself.
All these people who I've introduced you to so far, they're all trying to find the balance. But it's complicated. And with the complications, the physical complications, the political complications, you have a lot of controversial points. Lots of uncertainty because the science isn't really good. So trying to keep these conversations from having people clash at each other, it presents a problem because there's a lot of pushback. Next slide, please. Now, here's some more people. I mean, I've met a lot of people. This is a really small selection. We have Chief Kayleen Sisk with the Winnemem-Wintu tribe. She's a great gal. Met her several occasions. She's up north of Shasta. That's where she's from. And they're concerned that the salmon, it's already bad enough. And with the decisions to be made, the salmon are going to have an even more difficult time, which is a central part of their whole life, their culture, everything. And so she's concerned. Off to the right, well, that's the front door of the Metropolitan Water District, okay? I sat down with those guys. You know what? There's a lot of reasonable stuff going on there, as well as I know you've got this pushback and political stuff, but there's reasonable stuff coming out of there, too. They've reduced their water consumption per person quite significantly, and they can go a long ways more, but they're moving in the right direction. We don't want to just slap somebody on the side of the head because it's not where I want them to be right now. They're moving in the right direction. They have increased in population, but they're using less or equal water as something like 10 years ago. They're doing well, and they need to continue to do well faster because we have some real problems going on. Now, Alicia Kishner, she's with the Corps of Engineers, and her main focus is safety. Levees, flooding, things like that. So she's going to tell us now, basically she's going to be saying to us that it really takes a knowledgeable public to support big projects that are really expensive and complicated so they can get these levees fixed before the nasty things happen. And so let's hear what she says.
Understand flood risk, understand the consequences that would occur if there were a major flood event, and work to support local, state, and federal government, including the Corps, in terms of really working together to manage to reduce that risk of flooding.
As you can probably already tell, you can't really take climate change out of our lives. It's here. It's been here. So this is not a conversation where we will talk about whether it's, alive and well, whether it's really happening or not. It's happening. And a lot of people have been looking at this, next slide please, and trying to come up with ways of adapting to it. Another type, the last type of drought, is a socioeconomic drought, and that is when you don't have enough water to go around, and it affects your economic values, your economic goods that you can produce. Next slide. There's your example. The cantaloupe fields on Joe Del Boss farm. You know, the people that got these cantaloupes were going to get them 2 days or 3 days later in North Carolina. So by Thursday or Friday, actually by Friday or Saturday, they'd be on someone's table at breakfast time. Okay? If we don't resolve our water issues, that's not going to be happening in the Carolinas. They're not going to have it. It has an economic hurt attached to it when we have lack of water out here and we don't know how to deal with it. Next slide, please. Paso Robles watershed. We hear a lot about the Central Valley groundwater problems, but I don't know how many of you have heard about the Paso Robles watershed. Their wells are going dry. Rural residential wells, ones that I'm certainly familiar with. Nick, you're familiar with it. They're going dry. And there are farmers using that water. There are cattlemen using that water. Vineyards, it's a popular place for vineyards. A lot more vineyards are going in, even now, which I don't understand when they have such a water problem. Domestic use, rural residential, municipal use, all these uses are being affected right now because their groundwater supplies are dwindling, and they have a basement where you can't go below it. So the economic aspect of this is if the vineyard industry dies in the Paso Robles area, that place is going to change because economically it's not going to be bringing in the money that allows the lifestyle there to be quite comfortable. So I'd like to introduce you to really, I'm going to go straight to it, to Sue Luft on the bottom slide, standing there with Bill Stansberry. They have houses, they're retired, houses with wells. I interviewed those guys, and they're telling me that, you know what, by gosh, we got to manage our groundwater here, and we got to do it together. That's our hope. So go ahead and play that.
Well, yeah, it's a real problem. Our wells dropped 137 feet. We had a new well drilled. We haven't started using it yet. We're trying to hobble on the old well because the new well smells like sulfur. We haven't done water quality analysis yet, but we know that that's not what we want to do. They went to the basement, 540 feet. There's no water below that, according to the two hydrogeologists that we talked to in the drilling firms. So there is no one producing drinking water below where we're at. This is our last well. If it keeps up at this rate, 5 years there may be no water. I don't know.
Like I say, it's something that we've all taken for granted. And then in this area, the major driving factor of the economy right now is the vineyard industry. And I just fear to think of what would happen if we continue in this overdraft mode and our vineyards start going under. What happens to the local economy then? And like Sue said, well, there goes the value of your property when your economy tanks. So this has got to be something that we address communally.
Guess what? That's a reality check for us up here. They're already experiencing it. We have a chance to do something about it, and I don't see any decent effort to actually manage our water supply up in the Sierras. Not just here in Nevada County, but a lot of the counties going south. Calaveras County is doing some things. Tuolumne is doing some things. We're doing nothing. And really that needs to change. Next slide, please. Well, you know what? When you have a nasty disaster or catastrophe, a difficulty as we have right now because of the drought, it's a great opportunity to pass new legislation, which really has been sorely needed. California is one of the only states that has not had a groundwater regulation that controlled it in a sustainable way. But now, as of September of last year, we have the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act of 2014, which activated as of January 1st of this year. The Central Valley was the poster child of this. If the Central Valley condition was not as it has been, this would probably have had a hard time getting voted on and approved. But it required, actually it was 3 bills that were passed in September. Interestingly, the Paso Robles people, they are already ahead of the game. They had come up with their own legislation, and it just so happened that the state got motivated and did it. So the Paso Robles ended up with their rendition of this particular act at the same time. So when our Governor Brown was sitting at his desk with his pen signing those, he signed all 3 of them. And one of those was for the people of Paso Robles. But we have a lot of work to do, even after that, because a part of this sustainable management program is to establish a groundwater sustainability agency, somebody who's going to be responsible for meeting the goals of this act, which is we need a sustainable supply, and they spell out a few things. It's going to require regulating wells to some degree, measuring, managing, monitoring, things like that, and it's going to have to be done. I mean, actually, the aquifers need to be sustainable within 20 years. I think that's going to be too late, to be honest with you. It could be too late. It just depends on what kind of weather we have coming our way. But it's a good thing we now have that kicked in, and it gives at least those people living in the lower elevations with the medium and high risk areas an opportunity and support from an act to get the job done. Has no effect on us up here in the Sierras. Has none. Okay? We're on our own. We are forgotten. 60% of our population in Nevada County is forgotten. That's not okay. We need to pick it up ourselves and get the job done. Manage ourselves. Next slide, please. Okay, give you a broader perspective. We've been talking about California a lot, but hey, look up in Washington. See the red spots? East side of the Cascades. Groundwater is dropping. They've been getting in droughts not quite as extensively as us. Look at Colorado. Those two red dots in Colorado, that's the Denver Basin. Denver Basin has 4 aquifers. The water in those aquifers is fossil water, just like the Central Valley. And those water levels in those aquifers have been dropping for years. So when you pump water these days from those aquifers, it's appropriated for one, and number two, it has to last. You have to count it out. It has to last for 300 years. So you make these estimates on how much water is in that aquifer beneath your property, divided by 300, and that's the amount of water per year you can pump out. They're quite serious about it. And then we have, of course, Arizona, spotted different areas, New Mexico. Texas has some serious water issues going on, off and on in different areas. If you go further east, or Louisiana, certainly, North Carolina, West Virginia, Iowa, we have issues all over our United States. It's not just in California. Next slide, please. Okay, so what would you call this drought? What I call this drought is a sweeping meteorological, agricultural, hydrologic, socioeconomic event that actually brings people together. This can be a good thing. We're in a world of hurt, but we can actually do something. And the way we do it is work collectively together, and we learn to adapt more so we can handle the more extremes. We collaborate more because if we work together in this room, we are strong. If we work as individuals, well, good luck. You'll be good for a while, and then you're going to burn out. You're not going to be able to do it. We work very well together as a team, as a collaborative team. Being resourceful. I may have one good idea. Georgia has a lot of good ideas, and Aida, all you guys, everybody has an idea, something worth sharing with everybody else so we can get through these hard spots. That's what we really need. And how we do it is through making daily choices. That's how we do it. Next slide, please. So, you tell me, are you vulnerable to losing your water supplies to some significant degree? What do you think? Show of hands. I mean, how many people feel they really are vulnerable? It's true. Nothing that I've said here, the people I've spoken are speaking from the heart. It's the real stuff. Next slide, please. Do you think we're in the driver's seat? Can we do something about it? It's a big problem. Is it too big for us to do anything about it? We can do something. Yeah, absolutely we can do something about this. We can prepare for shortage, which these people are doing just that. We can also take steps to slow down, probably never stop, the effects of carbon dioxide, because that's such a big thing. But we can slow it down, which gives us more adaptability time. It makes sense. Next slide, please. And we will have no problem dealing with climate change if we remember this. We will always have water working together. Working together, that part's the most important part. We will always have water when we work together. That's one message, really, that you need to listen to and actually live by that. So next slide, please. So what are you going to do? There's a lot of stuff you can do on a personal level. But when you get in these conversations with people, we want to come from our value system. The value system that we share with other community members. And in all the different interviews that I've had, the virtues that I have heard are things like responsibility, respect, building trust, honesty, kindness, self-control. Those are the kinds of virtues. If we can have controversial topics that we have conversations about, but apply the virtues that we really do believe in, we're going to get somewhere. Next slide, please. So when a discussion happens, and you can tell it's getting more and more and more polarized, what are you going to do? How do you diffuse that and move it in the right direction? Because if it becomes more polarized, we just stop talking to each other, and then everything comes to a halt. Well, you do it by beginning to ask questions with curiosity. I'm trying to understand exactly where are they coming from, because there may be some value there, and I'm just not seeing it right now. Listen, 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 ask more questions, and try to get a reciprocating thing going on with the other person. That's how you continue the conversation without the polarization. Think about it. We can do that in our own homes, under other circumstances, let alone issues related to drought. Keep the dialogue going. Next slide. So here, what you can do, start in your own homes. Use less water. Use water more efficiently. Match your use with the status of the aquifer. If the status of the aquifer is not so good this year, you use less. If you have a lot of money in your bank account, go on a vacation. If you don't have a whole lot there, well, we'll probably pass on the vacation, do something smaller. It's the same thing with water. A lot of other things you can do, but adaptation is really important. Collaboration, resourcefulness, I've mentioned that already. Next slide. Okay, I want you to take this one home. Really think about it. And then email me with what you would do, okay? What I'm asking you is, how will you manage, assuming you have a well? Let's assume everybody here has a well. How are you going to manage your situation if your neighbor's well is interfering with yours? Okay? The way that happens is, if you have two wells and they're so close to each other that when you pump them, the water levels decline, of course, in the well, but it also creates an anomaly outside the well in the aquifer, and you start pulling double time water from your neighbor. You affect each other. How are you going to manage that? Think about it. And I want to hear from you. I'd love to hear from you. So I'm serious. Next slide, please. Our governor has asked different percentages, but he's basically asked us to reduce by 36%. I think, what, NID right now is 25? They reduced it to 25? 36? That's hard. How do you do that? Well, you do that by conserving outside the house. That's number one. You can gain the most by conserving outside the house. Use a different, handle your grass differently or remove it if you really can. Conserve inside the house. Think about ways to reduce water. Stop leaks. That's like almost 2%. Leaks that are just going, you just never fixed it. Next slide, please. Okay, NID, you don't have to read all these, but my point is, there's too much there. But NID has mandatory restrictions for treated water. Next slide. And also, they have measures for canal water. Okay, read them. There's a URL. NID water. Information drought, just Google any of those, you'll get there. Okay, read them if you have NID water and make the appropriate changes. It's not going to be easy reducing by 36%. But if we don't do that, we may not have enough water to deal with next year, so take it seriously. Take that level of responsibility. Remember, responsibility is one of those virtues that we hold near and dear to us. Next slide. So what I'm all about is working together to solve water problems. The reason why we have problems is we never seem to work together. We always have problems. We don't get past it. Not always, but much of the time. Next slide, please. And so what we believe is we expedite these changes, bringing people together, solving these problems through outreach programs. Bringing people together is really a basic component in reducing climate change. Drought is part of that climate change. We're in it right now. So that's what I'm proposing. Get together as groups and get the job done. Start reducing your water usage to get us out of this drought. Start thinking about slowing down your emissions. That's a big question, but scale the amount of CO2. I know there are other countries that are putting out big time CO2, but we will do our part because we are responsible, and that's what I'm suggesting. So thank you.